question of the pupil. You seem to be suggesting that according to Gurdjieff, the source of all our troubles is that there is a break in the chain of energetic production in us. What exactly does this mean? The teacher replies, I have explained that Ouspensky misinterpreted and misunderstood Gurdjieff at almost every turn. Indeed, we could say at every turn. However, Ouspensky has recorded very, very accurately. He was a journalist, remember. He has recorded very, very accurately many things that Gurdjieff said and many things that Gurdjieff explained to him. This means that Ouspensky's writings, and in particular the book In Search of the Miraculous, are extraordinarily valuable documents. When we look at this book, In Search of the Miraculous, we can see that Ouspensky appears to have recorded extremely well, extremely clearly, exactly what the problem is. And this lies in the fact that Ouspensky has recorded 2 food diagrams. Now, I have explained that what Gurdjieff was teaching was a transformation. We are living at too low a level. We must raise the energetic level of the whole organism up to a much higher level in a transformation before any individual development can begin. This is an energetic process. It's not a matter of psychology. But Ouspensky has recorded 2 food diagrams. The first of these shows what we can describe, in fact, in reality as a depleted energetic state. The first food diagram. This depicts visually our depleted energetic state as ordinary men and women. This is the start of the transformation. But Gurdjieff apparently also gave to Ouspensky what appears to be an augmented food diagram. But in fact, this is the normal, and I choose my words carefully here, this is the normal energetic state that we should have. So this is the end of the transformation that Gurdjieff is teaching. So we are inducing in ourselves an energetic change. And it is an energetic change from the first food diagram, as Ouspensky depicts it, which appears to be a depleted energetic state of the ordinary man or woman. We're going from this to the second food diagram, which appears actually to be an augmented energetic state, but is actually the normal. This is how we should be. And the difference, when we examine it, between the 2 food diagrams lies in the receipt of the food of impressions. Now, the break in the question, if we go back to your question, the break in the chain of energetic production in us. It is about food, but this is not, and this is why we need to study this book, In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, and Gurdjieff's teaching. We need to study this very carefully. It's not obvious to the ordinary man, because when we refer to food, we are not referring simply to just ordinary food and water. Although ordinary food and water is very important, it is actually essential, and there are essential elements that we require in that ordinary food and water that can only come from food. Higher elements, minerals, vitamins, that we must make sure that we have, and that we have in abundance. So it is about food, ordinary food and water, which we must change to make it, in fact, shall we say, nourishing. Not in the sense of acquiring carbohydrates or calories or protein, this nonsense that is part of the psychology of the ordinary man, but in terms of these essential elements which science knows something about, but maybe not everything. We start to use, for example, sea salt, because the sea washes over all the rocks on the whole planet, and thus has a mix of minerals, some of which are known, some of which are unknown, but which we require and we can only obtain from food. We have a mass of other essential elements, essential meaning they can only come from our food. We have a mass of other essential elements, known and unknown, that we require. But when we speak of food, we are not just speaking about food and drink in the ordinary sense of the word. We are talking about the three foods that are described very clearly and extremely well by Ouspensky in the book In Search of the Miraculous. That is to say, ordinary food and water is one food, taken in at a certain level. In addition to this, we have food, elements, energies from the air and the atmosphere, taken in a variety of different ways, and equally as complex as ordinary food and water in its makeup, or even perhaps more complex. And then we have what is described by Gurdjieff to Ouspensky as the food of impressions, coming from perception. These are energies about which we know nothing. We don't even suspect that they exist until we read the book, Ouspensky's book, In Search of the Miraculous. So we have three kinds of foods. Now, to go back to your question, the break in the chain of energetic production in us is that we don't actually receive, as we should, this food of impressions. The food of impressions sounds in us, according to the food diagrams, and this will sound like nonsense to those who haven't read this book and who haven't become integrated with our work here. It will sound like nonsense, but the food of impression sounds in us only as do in an octave. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. It sounds in us only as do. It does not develop as it should, as a food. It is not digested as it should be. So the major part of our work here is in fact about something about which the ordinary man knows nothing and does not even suspect the existence of. That is to say, a food, an energy coming from impressions, in turn from our perception. A food coming from perception. The ordinary man takes his perception of the world, his experience of the world, as if that is the world. Well, of course it is the world, but it's only a picture of the world, and it can be augmented. Our perception is not a given. Our experience of the world is not a given. It is something that we create in our own way. Now, I've probably confused you enormously there, But those who have read the book by Ouspensky, In Search of the Miraculous, will start to understand what I'm talking about. The break in the chain of energetic production in us is that we don't receive the food of impressions as we should. We don't therefore have the energies, again, energies of a kind that are unknown to the ordinary man or woman, unknown to science, and yet clearly exist. We can prove that they exist. There is a break in the chain of energetic production in us. We don't receive the food of impressions coming from perception as we should. Therefore, we don't have the energies we should have, and we fall to a very, very low energetic level, the first food diagram as Ouspensky presents it. Therefore, this is the area in which we are going to work. To encourage, to provide conditions, to engage in tasks, techniques, to allow the food of impressions to sound in us as they should. In turn, using the food diagrams, we can see that this allows also the energies that come from the air and the atmosphere in us as a food. It allows these to develop even more. And we arrive at a state in which we are, or we have, the energetic background pictured by Ouspensky in the book In Search of the Miraculous as a second food diagram, which appears an augmented energetic state, but is in fact a normal. This is how we should be. We should have all these energies, and all these energies at a much, much higher level than we have now. So we've fallen to such a low energetic level, the first food diagram. And our work is to a transformation, to ascend the stairway, as Gurdjieff explained it to Ouspensky. Our work is to transform the first food diagram into the second food diagram. And this second food diagram depicts the energetic background we should have as normal men and women at the end of the transformation. Once we have crossed the final threshold of the stairway, once we've ascended the stairway, this is the energetic background we should have. And only then, with this energetic background depicted in the second food diagram from Ouspensky, can our own individual development actually begin. Well, let's try and get the notes at least recorded, and then we can put them in some sort of order. So this is the start of it. We can question whether in the course of our lives it is possible for us to improve or to develop in some way. I always start my talks by saying that there are two completely different teachings associated with Gurdjieff. There is the traditional teaching ascribed to Gurdjieff. I call it the Gurdjieff tradition, which actually comes from Ouspensky. Then, on the other hand, there is Gurdjieff's own teaching, coming from his writings and particularly from his book, The Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson. These two teachings are completely different. Those in the Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Ouspensky, may claim that the teaching in this tradition cannot be defined. This is not true. The Gurdjieff tradition actually claims that ordinary men and women can develop during their lives by means of efforts on their part, known as work on oneself. And that this development is the development in them of their consciousness. However, when we examine what Gurdjieff himself wrote, we find he claims that ordinary men and women cannot develop in any way during their lives, and that any attempt to do so does not work and only makes their situation worse. He explains that before any individual development can take place, a complete and complex transformation is necessary to raise the energetic level of the whole organism to a much higher level. Only then, after this transformation, which he described to Ouspensky as a stairway, and at this much higher level, only then can any individual development even begin. Gurdjieff's actual teaching, as described in his writings, was about this transformation necessary before any individual development can begin, and was aimed at aiding this transformation. Describing his teaching as recorded by Ouspensky and in the language of Ouspensky, Gurdjieff was asked the question, from where does the way begin? Gurdjieff replied, the way begins at a level much higher than the level of ordinary life. Between ordinary life and the way lies the stairway. Only when the last threshold on the stairway has been crossed does the way begin. Therefore, the questions, can we improve or develop during our lives, and if so, how? From these we find two completely different answers, manifesting as two completely different teachings. The Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Ouspensky, claims that we can develop by means of efforts on our part. These efforts are fundamentally psychological efforts known as the work, the method, or as work on oneself. Gurdjieff himself, however, writes that we cannot change or develop in any way. Firstly, we must change the energetic background to our lives, thus raising the overall energetic level of the whole organism to a new level. And that only at this new level can our individual development begin. Further, this change in energies cannot be achieved by psychological means. It must be achieved by the gradual and patient application of practical techniques handed down from teachers to pupils. I add here, the Gurdjieff tradition has misunderstood the nature of these techniques. Now, we go on further. Gurdjieff's teaching is not philosophical nor psychological. We can extract from his writings and from what he is recorded to have told Ouspensky that there is a break in the chain of energetic production in us as ordinary men and women. We do not receive as food the energies we should, and live as a result in an energetically depleted state. This becomes worse and worse. We thus fall into internal structures from which we cannot escape. We do not have the appropriate energies to maintain ourselves as distinct from these structures. We are trapped in them. This is an abnormal situation, and we create in ourselves, thus, an abnormal psychology. The psychology is an adaptation of our lives to the fact that we have fallen to such a low and depleted energetic state, that we are trapped in inner structural situations from which we cannot emerge. We cannot change our psychology by psychological means. Our psychology is a consequence of a cause. That is, a consequence of our being trapped in inner structures. To change the consequences of a cause, that is, our psychology, without changing the cause, means that the consequences, our abnormal psychology, will simply revert back in time to what it was previously, the cause remaining the same. To try to change our psychology by psychological means does not work, and only disrupts our already established state, achieving nothing. We must prove this to ourselves. Gurdjieff spoke to Ouspensky about man the machine. Ouspensky records this, writing that man is a machine. This is not true. There are a large number of scientific laws that prove that organic beings, including man, are not machines. We must therefore look for the meaning intended by Gurdjieff in speaking of man the machine. A machine is a complex device made by man in order to perform a specific function or functions, and it always has an operator. Gurdjieff was thus, by speaking of man as a machine, defining the exact extent of his teaching. He was teaching about man, the machine, and not about the operator of the machine. He was teaching mechanics, not psychology. There is a break in the chain of energetic production in us, and we have fallen to a very low energetic level. We are, as a result, trapped in internal structural situations from which we cannot emerge. Trapped in this way, we create for ourselves an abnormal psychology. We cannot change this abnormal psychology by psychological means, because it is merely a consequence of a cause. Gurdjieff was showing that we must look at the cause of the abnormalities in our psychology. That is, our structural and energetic situation. We must look at the machine and not at the operator. Ouspensky misunderstood Gurdjieff and misdirected his pupils by paradoxically claiming man is a machine, and then teaching in London from 1921 to 1941 his system, which is about the operator of the machine. That is, about control of the machine, or psychology. This teaching became the Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Ouspensky. It is not Gurdjieff's teaching. The question of the pupil. You have suggested that although Gurdjieff was showing that we have an abnormal psychology, he was not actually teaching about psychology, because our abnormal psychology is a consequence of a cause. And you say that the cause of our abnormal psychology, the cause that Gurdjieff was pointing out, is that we have fallen to such a low energetic level that we are trapped in internal structures from which we cannot escape. Now, this is a very strange idea to encounter. Could you give us an example of what it was that, or what it is that Gurdjieff means by these internal structures, and how does being trapped in these internal structures, as you say we are, because we have such a low energetic level, how does this create in us an abnormal psychology as a consequence? Could you explain this a little bit more to us? The teacher replied,